Hello and welcome to the Doublethink Dialogues podcast. So today we're talking about climate change. We got here finally. It is the topic of the last however long it's been. I guess in England it more or less came on the radar in 2010. I think it started coming on the radar. That's my understanding. A lot of us over in North America were paying attention in the 90s. There's a lot going on with climate change, and it's not all about the climate. One of the things I guess that's important to note is around 2018, the BBC decided, I think in line with UN policy, that they wouldn't have anyone on their shows anymore who was a skeptic. So that everything you heard from 2018 in the mainstream media appears to have suggested the issue is settled because they didn't present an alternative opinion, which to me sounds very strange because this is a very complex science and no science is settled ever. There's always room for discussion. So to suggest the science is settled is to suggest a political agenda. But I am curious, sort of, when did it come on your radar? Did you pay much attention to climate change? Is it sort of has it ramped up in the mainstream, or were you paying attention before that as well?
I've been seeing it ramp up, I suppose, substantially even before Greta. But she's not many years back, is she? I would think, I'm guessing 80s, 90s, but still fairly fringe. I mean, and my own background is I was very strongly environmental in terms of interests, not actually doing anything, but in terms of interests. I'm not even going to name the decade, but I mean, I think I was, obviously the people were saying it before me, but I was.
So are you like one of the founders of Greenpeace or something?
Well, no, I would say actually that in my history of environmentalism, probably my failing to get a job with Greenpeace, or was it the other organization at the time, was when my interest in the environments have tailed off, or basically, or it became, it wasn't going to become my career, or my life's work, and I suppose it's not unnatural that so what are you going to do with it, so for it being I mean, I always have a major hobby horse in life, which varies from time to time, and it was that for a long time. And even then, in my day, I remember there being one of the early environmental books which suggested that we were already in a balance where you'd say that the greenhouse gases were warming the planet up, and we were being kept cool by the pollution in the atmosphere that was reflecting. So basically, we were already dependent on maintaining the same balance of pollution between greenhouse gases, and so the greenhouse gases, I think, had got a mention, but they weren't dominant. You didn't know that, well, actually, the smog is going to overrule the green. So that was in the future, and my interest, probably still as now, was in preservation of environment, as in rainforest and wilderness in general,
right,
and of wild species. I mean, it was sort of a David Attenborough level of interest in, not because it was immediately threatening to us, but for wanting to preserve some natural world.
Yeah. So for me, that's interesting, and that's a very important point to bring up, because when you bring up the point of climate change, which is, I will suggest, largely political nowadays, but it does get entangled with the broader environmental issues and conflated, I would suggest. And so people will, if you say, well, I'm not entirely certain whether the climate change narrative is accurate. There are a lot of climate scientists, mainstream ones, who will suggest, oh, well, maybe human involvement is like 40% of the issue and the rest is a natural cycle. But if you bring up anything like that, they'll say, well, don't you care about the environment? You're like, well, yeah, I care about I walk most places, right? In the summer, I bike most places. I don't like using cars if I can avoid it. And so I would love to have cleaner environment, breathing in less smog when I walk, protecting, but things do change as well. You can't bubble wrap the entire environment. It is going to change. Animals come, species rise, species fall, etc. I think most people can agree that we want to have a certain level of protection of the environment. I won't say everyone will agree that, but most people will agree. And so I think we really have to separate these two issues. And, I first became aware of some kind of climate issue, I think, when I was in primary school. I remember hearing a discussion on the news at that time, because we'd come out of actually a cooling period, right? It was sort of just post World War II, so 50s to like 1970, there was actually a cooling period. And so scientists were suggesting, oh, well, is this cooling period going to trigger another ice age, basically? And then it went back warming again, and then we got into global warming, and then that ramped up. The main issue was ozone for a while until we got that under control, but that was being tapered off anyway by industry. The thing that was interesting to me with global warming was that when it became apparent that the entire planet wasn't warming at the same rate and wasn't going to have the same effects everywhere, so it was going to be very hard to sell under the term global warming. It turned the name changed to climate change, which became a more, in reality, more accurate, but unfortunately, I think as the mainstream has felt less fear-mongering term, right? And that was around maybe 2005, sort of early 2000s. So they still use global warming as this sort of fear stick, I suppose, even though it doesn't give the proper perspective on what's happening anymore. So it makes some people very afraid, but it gives very inaccurate interpretation.
Yes, you had the difficulty of explaining to some people like us that actually your global warming will be that you freeze to death.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the North Atlantic drift does whatever it does, and inverts or whatever. And linking it to stopping using fossil fuels. I mean, I can remember when, yes, as environmentalists, we wanted people to cut back on the use of fossil fuels, but the driver was running out of these things. Now that would be an environmentalist dream. Now, if the companies would say, "Look, sorry, we've overestimated. There is no more oil or coal to dig." That would be the
Euphoric,
best. That would be the most fantastic news you could receive now.
Yeah, that was the 70s, wasn't it? It was. We were literally told in school. I think we were told by like 2000 there'd be no more oil or gas. Maybe by 2020, something like that. But it was like really soon we're being made afraid, and they just keep finding more, right?
Yeah, and I can remember seriously thinking that people must, anyone buying a new car, and I think this would be early 70s, you're buying a new car, don't know what petrol prices are going to do, but when that car is only halfway through its useful life, you're going to have very shiny half new cars just piled up doing nothing. And in a sense, I mean, the price escalation did seem to be happening at one point, but it was in response to another Arab-Israeli war, and was not this. Well, it was a supply problem due to embargo or deliberate cutback in production. It wasn't that they were running out or anywhere near running out.
Yeah, and the whole carbon dioxide link with fossil fuels as well is, I mean, it's accepted by the majority of people now because it's been pushed so hard. I'm going to suggest here, and I know I'm not the only one, that the link is more tenuous than powers want you to believe anyway. I mean, and fair enough. Like if you look back at industrialized England, right? It was a mess. It was dirty. It was, and smog filled air, and undoubtedly heavily polluted, and undoubtedly a lot because of the fossil fuels that's burning. But we have a lot cleaner stuff now, and so that's can arguably be not the same issue. But for me, one of the weird things is the correlations don't seem to always match up very well. So global warming has been happening. It's on record. I've looked at the Canadian data back as far as 1850. And for the record, Canada has a great website. I believe it's called yourenvironment.ca. You can go to. It's the only country I've found that has such a good website, so accessible. You can look at any community in the country that has given their data to the government, and it's you can download it in Excel spreadsheet format, basically, right? So it's very accessible. You try to go anywhere else, and you get like you have to be a climate scientist to have the right software to even be able to read the data. So I highly recommend checking that out if you're interested. But global warming has been pretty steady since then, right? So you take 1850 and you model it, and you can, if you model it on a sort of, if you let's say zoom out enough of the data, it's pretty, it's got noise in it, but it's pretty steady uphill climb the whole time, and that's interesting. Canada happens to be warming at twice the rate of the global average, as is not uncommon in some of the northern hemisphere countries. But it is, you don't see this crazy ramping up, this crazy exponential. They tried to convince us of this with a hockey stick, right? Which is a manipulation of data on many levels. Also because they've taken a very, very tiny piece of the graph and blown it up to a very large level, right? So if you look at the actual temperature data, you find that it's essentially linear all the way from 1850 to now. What you get if you look at the carbon dioxide data, carbon dioxide emissions is not the same, right? Because there's in the 60s a huge boom in automotive manufacturing and purchasing, and you get a massive exponential rise in carbon dioxide in the 60s. So if that directly relates to temperature, why do we not see a massive temperature rise or any noticeable temperature rise at the same time instead of this steady climb, right? That's the weirdest thing. Now I'll go into one more thing before so I don't monopolize all the time. But what was interesting in this steady climb is there are patterns buried in that. So you can then blow up if you zoom in on the data, and you fit it to, let's say, polynomial curves using Excel, which is quite trivial. You can actually see that there are cycles built within that data, and they're approximately 10-year cycles. And so it made me think inherently that this larger one is also part of a cycle, right? Which a lot of people do talk about. I think if you are any kind of skeptical on this issue, you know about the Milankovitch cycles, which are solar cycles. And a lot of this data does fit very well with that. I'm not saying that humans have not had an involvement in climate change, or that we aren't affecting it in some future direction, but we do have to factor in all of these natural cycles that are occurring before we have any idea how much involvement we have, and that doesn't seem to be in the political agenda for what we're constantly being told. So I'm fairly skeptical because I also don't see that the UN is interested specifically in climate change when they talk about climate change. If you look at their conventions, and so some of the independent medias have gone there, and they have billboards all around the convention, which are talking about the issues they're going to be discussing at these climate change conventions. And climate change, I think, was 12th out of 20 or something, right? I mean, all the other issues were, global wealth redistribution, equity, etc., equality of people around the world. Not inherently bad topics, but not climate.
But definitely people with agendas and interests. I remember somebody parroting the phrase "polluter pays." So basically, yes, there's pollution going, and you owe us money for it. Well, even countries, and I think it was India in that case, which are leaping up the scale of pollution.
Yeah. India is also blaming the West, though, as well, for climate change. Whenever we point finger at India and say, "Look, you guys are starting to pollute an awful lot," India goes, "Well, we didn't create the problem. You got to look at yourselves, right? It's not us."
And again, when you're applying responsibility for it, you think, well, yes, Britain was way ahead in terms of the increase in carbon dioxide production and in steel production. But where was our steel going? They'd spread out across India in railway lines. Surely it is the consumer, which is them, who should get and now for what's being produced in China. I mean, if we're buying the Chinese output and they're producing carbon dioxide, in a sense, we should take it. That some of that should be down to us, not down to them.
Yes, darn it, make the former colonies pay.
Yes. But I mean, Yes, I mean, even when it was on, when we were way ahead briefly for in the production side, we weren't, we were exporting it. That was.
Yeah, no, that's important. That's always an important point when, and again, the suggestion by UN groups and other countries is that the West, the richer West countries, may owe reparations for climate issues as well.
Yes.
And you're like, well,
so obviously you want the climate issue. Well, there's no reparations.
Yeah, exactly, which would destroy their whole thing. But you're right. Is that it's not like you didn't benefit from the West's actions, right? I mean, okay, you can claim colonialism, and it was bad. There was a lot of bad things that happened under colonialism, but it also brought infrastructure to a lot of these countries that wouldn't have been able to build their own infrastructure initially, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the actual coal was exported. I mean, coal was a huge. I mean, you thinking of us as the lead industrial power, the first country to industrialize, to a large extent, we were actually a raw material producer. We were not a backward country, but we were, we were like Saudi saying now, we were getting rich by selling the natural resources out from under the ground for other people to do stuff with, like burn.
Right. Yeah. So what I'm curious about, I mean, and we'll probably get into this in future episodes, either with you or with other members of the group. And it's going to sound conspiratorial, and probably, well, some people think it is, but we're talking a sort of Agenda 2030, and the whole climate change ramping up of the rhetoric occurred, as I said, end of 2017, early 2018. Which conveniently was when they told us there was 12 years left for the planet, and sort of spurred on Greta Thunberg's career, basically. And that corresponds directly with the 2030 agenda, which is now called 2030 Vision. It's not a conspiracy. It is a thing. You can look it up on their websites. So what I'm curious is, are we going to be hearing more and more of this climate change rhetoric? I mean, we know that climate change is happening. I'm not going to say it's not happening. I'm just suggesting it may not be entirely due to humans, or necessarily even mostly due to humans. And it matters, right? It matters whether it's us or whether it's nature, because what we do may or may not have any effect, or may make it worse. It's important that we understand the accuracy on this. So it is important to continue asking questions. Because we can still trigger an ice age, right? I mean, everyone's worried about runaway global warming, but we can trigger an ice age probably a lot easier than we'll burn the planet down. So that's one of my fears. Some rich group decides to put a solar mirror to reflect the light from the Earth, and ends up putting us into a permanent ice age. And incidentally, that was a plan that was listed on the World Economic Forum's website. So it's not a far-flung idea.
I can remember suggesting, and I think it's been taken up in other places, and I'm not sure if I was serious or if they're serious, but the idea if we all wore like those large Chinese conical hats with a reflecting material on, and as the population grew, we would reflect more light, energy back into space.
Yeah, exactly. Some strange. That's basically that is essentially the basis of most of the ideas. Although that one does sound rather strange, but I think I've heard that one as well.
Perfect.
But the idea of reflecting more light back in, either with putting a mirror up or seeding the clouds, seeding the oceans, something like that. What I'm ultimately curious is, by the time we get to 2030, like, this is going to ramp up for a while, in and out of the various wars and cyber attacks and pandemics and whatever else is coming. If they succeed in creating their techno-fascist utopia, whatever you want to call it, will we suddenly no longer hear about climate change? That's what I'm curious about. Post 2030, like, if they're successful in creating their global social credit system, and achieving their goals, all of a sudden, I think that would be a telling case. If all of a sudden all the climate change rhetoric in the media disappears, then we know that it wasn't really a thing at all to start with, right? And we'll probably be alive to see that, one way or the other. I don't know if they succeed or not, but that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah. With that question of when might it end? Not climate change, but the obsession or the sensible preoccupation, whichever you like with it. It already applies even in relation to Greta, in that from with her rhetoric, we've already passed the point beyond which it is useless to struggle further. It's gone. Basically, we are now too late to save ourselves.
Yeah.
So what happens
exactly.
So does the climate change movement just close down? Well, it doesn't seem to have done.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Because you can go back into the late 1800s and find people talking about climate change and the dangers of it, right? And from the 1980s, 1990s, Al Gore, right? 2000s, right? Coastal cities in the U.S. were supposed to be underwater by 2015. They're not, right? They when their predictions are wrong, they just change the timeline again.
Yes,
the classic doomsday.
Yes,
right.
Yes, it's not. Oh well, that was what. It's not like a meteorite passing or a meteor passing, saying, well, yeah, that was going to. It's gone past. It's not going to get nearer and nearer as it's going the other way. So
Exactly.
But yeah, I suppose they have the opportunity to explain why it's delayed a bit.
Yeah. So it's just they just keep delaying. Okay. No, it's not. It's another 12 years.
Yeah.
Okay, another. But it's always seems to be 12 years, which is interesting as well.
I mean, that's probably more to do with the plan. The how to build up to the action they want. So basically, somebody has got a plan that by from my speech today saying we've got, or their speech today saying we've got 12 years, it's mapped out. That is the point where if I gain traction, that's the point where we have an impact. So we will always be. There's no point in predicting, in giving us less than, if they say, well, it's next week,
right.
There's not a lot we can do about it. Quick, turn the central heating off. Or
12 years gives you enough time to change your narrative as well.
Yes.
When you're undoubtedly wrong.
Yeah.
But it does bring up an interesting thing with Greta Thunberg, because, like you say, she bought into the 12-year, the world's going to be burning by 2030 narrative. And
but there was actually a deadline. At some point there was two. Not done in 2 years. You're screwed. Basically.
Yeah. So point of no return, right?
Yes,
so like this is the by 2030 we were supposed to be burning, and so there's a point of no return. And something that was interesting was, she's talking at the UN. She's giving all these talks. She goes to talk to the EU, and they say, "Oh yes, well we're going to we've managed to create an agreement where we'll set net zero goals for 2050." And they're all like, okay, politicians are coming out. We're all happy. We've made this agreement. And she was fuming because, rightfully so, from her perspective, she had a belief that the world is going to end in 2030. Why are you making goals for 2050?
We'll do something about it 20 years later.
So if you honestly believe, and because of Greta, many children then developed climate anxiety, right? And actually believe this as well. And clearly the politicians don't believe it. As much as they tell you, they don't act as if they believe it. And therefore, they might believe something else. There is something else going on we can get into. It maybe, I don't know about this episode, but the fact that they're all building bunkers. Now, is that bunkers for the wars coming? Is that bunkers for a natural disaster? There's, I think I've mentioned in a previous episode, there's an asteroid coming in a few years. It's going to supposedly narrowly miss us. Who knows why that is? Entire countries are getting on the bunker bill. Italy's building a 2,000 person bunker. All the big guys are building bunkers, but they're still building or sort of buying mansions on the coast. So
yes, that's a slight contradiction there, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what to make of these guys, whether it's just a matter of hedging their bets and being safe, or whether but they don't seem to believe what they're preaching most of the time. And that's, I think, the big message that people need to take away is, I'm not saying not to believe, what you want to believe, but I'm just suggesting, look into it, seriously look into it. Because I don't think the carbon dioxide thing pans out very convincingly. There was something, so on sort of getting near the end of the episode, there was one thing I wanted to add in, which was Something else which may have scared some of them, maybe, I don't know, is that there was a massive methane release in 2006. And this could not be explained by human activities.
So are we thinking about permafrost
Well,
melting, or?
yeah, we're not sure. But what's interesting is that these methane releases apparently signal ice age termination events, which means obviously that the climate is going to warm. And so it could be that the powers may have taken that as, oh, we've been in a steady warming. Now it's going to get more extreme warming. That's a possibility. Not everyone will go there, but it's a possibility. Like that's something. But again, this leads to the fact that if it was true, and if this is a concern of theirs, why no transparency? Why just all this BS, right? Again, like climate change doesn't seem to be, let's say, climate change policies don't seem to be about climate change. They seem to be about creating more business opportunities, and creating a new tech sector, and wealth redistribution.
That is the odd and suspicious thing, that the response to a climate crisis is more economic growth. But basically it is business as usual. No one is, when they're talking about our demand for electricity to drive electric vehicles, no one's talking about us cutting down on car journeys. It's all still growth related, which I think with me, the period when I was an ardent environmentalist was very much an anti-economic growth, or at least economic growth. Obviously, you can have economic growth in the sense of saying, well, we're producing computers that were worth 1,000 times more than the previous one. So yes, that's it. But not growth in the sense of, volume of materials or fuel or anything like that.
Right. I agree. I agree completely. And it is weird, because if you, like, we're both old enough to have sort of followed some of these patterns in the behavior. And I remember in the early 90s, prior to the .com boom, there was a huge push on reducing excess packaging in products, right? To get rid of plastics, basically, from the environment. As plastics are still a concern now, but there is zero push to reduce excess packaging, or if there is any, it's very tiny and in very isolated areas. And in fact, you actually see more packaging on most things now than you did then, right? So again, another thing, like you say, and I agree with the cars as well, right? There doesn't seem to be a serious push to reduce traffic. It's we're just handling it for a while, and accepting it, and because it drives car sales, I assume as well. And because now it's convenient, because we have electric cars, so that's a whole new industry. And we have to make sure that industry is supported. So we want people to buy lots of electric cars. It's not that we want to stop people from driving specifically. We just want everyone to buy electric cars so we can support the new green industry, right? There's so much within this that you just have to pay attention a bit more than the average person, and you see the hypocrisies within it, the contradictions that happen within the various policies, and it has to make you think something is not proper here in this whole issue, right?
It's like the old guns before butter slogan, when you see actually the policy is guns and butter. We're not going to dare try and take the butter away from the public. And so it's yes, green environment, but your standard, the quantity of household goods around you is going to grow on. We're not going to try and make you cut down or slim down or anything. And I think I had a transition where, in my environmental days, which haven't passed, and I still care about wildlife and having a place for it. And in those days, I linked it to the UN taking some kind of control, and feeling that the world didn't need that kind of control. And if I subscribed to the global warming, I would think, well, yes, you need that level of control, because otherwise some people are going to be still burning coal when others aren't. So you would need that. And what I'm seeing since that days, I was secretary of my local UN association at one point, so I was very, very keen on that. And now I'm seeing the UN sensing you're seeing that basically it's a lot of sectional interest groups, and you're not really, it's not sensible to look for anything good to come out of this. And so as I've been presented with the kind of not exactly contradictory, but a lot of evidence for and against the global warming. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know the answer, but I doubt if there was a problem, I don't see, there better not be a problem, because I don't see the world being able to impose a solution on it. The UN just isn't up to that.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately where I ended up as well. And interestingly, it was when I came to England, I think, that sort of triggered a bit of that awareness, at least the start of it. When I came here, it was sort of during Christmas period. And so England is temperate for where it is geographically, but it's still cold in the winter. I mean, we're around 0 most of the time, right? And yet all the stores keep their doors wide open with their heat blasting right at the door. And I came here with the, with still under this kind of idea, okay, global warming is happening. It's something we've got to be concerned about, and we should be doing stuff. And then I came here and so also my wife was doing a residency in medicine at one of the hospitals, and they would come in, and so all the students, all the doctors, junior doctors, etc., would go out to the hospital, and then the cleaning staff would come in and clean the place up. And when they did, they'd watch television while they were doing it. And so they invariably left all the lights and the television on as well when they left, right? And so I just saw all of this massive amounts of waste, and I'm like, there's no way. Like if the world was depending on this kind of behavior to try and change this kind of behavior, we're doomed, right? There's no chance. And I think it's the same thing you're suggesting also on a larger scale with all the governments now and industry and everything. Like nothing they're doing is actually going to make any noticeable difference. And we're not the only ones saying that. And so you have to believe that it's not actually a real problem, because if it is a real problem, then we're not getting out of it, right? And so maybe it is a real problem. They're just building bunkers because they're going to hide from it, right? maybe that's the case, and all the rest of us are doomed, and they don't particularly care. They're just grabbing all the wealth they can. Maybe that's what it is. But if you're counting on their policies to help us, you might as well give up, because it's not going to happen.
And myself, given that I don't know on the climate change question, and falling back on my position as as an old style animal lover and nature and animals and habitat, etc. Which I see, and I saw the threat there in those days, driven as population growth, which has possibly gone away a little. But thinking, well, actually, if climate change is real, that our best prospect in relation to it is to leave ourselves the flexibility to say, yes, some of our food production is going to be lost, but if the population was small enough, we would have some room for maneuver. If we've constantly pushed population to the limit of what the Earth can stand, what do you do then if you lose some of that production? Well, the first thing you do is chop down what tiny bit is left of, well, maybe not tiny, but what is left of your rainforest, and that has to be the first thing to go when people are starving. I'm sure that will be said. But if you lose a bit more, what do you do? So basically, the kind of remedial action, as in not necessarily adopting a China one-child policy, but actually you're saying, well, if some people want fewer children than they're being forced to have, then could we not intervene to help them have as few as they want? But basically to try and address unnecessary population growth.
Yeah. I mean, this, I think, is the last topic we'll finish on, because I think maybe we should have an entire episode about this as well. But that kind of ideology, it was quite common through the 70s and 80s and even in the 90s, I think.
Population was, I've even seen lately a Quaker pamphlet which deals frankly with population as an issue. But you ask Greta or any of the modern Greens about population, and it's, you're blaming the people, because the people with the high birth rates are the least affluent. You're blaming the people who aren't responsible,
the poor or the minorities, or the developing countries.
Well, hang on. If you want greater equality in the world, the fact that somebody is not consuming much now doesn't mean they're not going to be consuming much in 10 years. It is not irrelevant that some people are having large families. even if at the moment they have no carbon footprint.
Yeah.
But I say that is an anathema to them. Although according to them, well, until Gaza came along, according to Greta, CO2 was the only thing that mattered.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
laying off, not criticizing people for having large families is important as well.
Yeah, I think Greta has had a bit of a turn, as she's probably come to realize the world won't end in 2030. But yeah, in terms of population, I mean, it will be interesting to discuss this. I think we will end it here, but it takes us down a path that I believe, and you've heard me speak on this before in other forums, is ultimately accelerating our natural destruction in a way. I personally believe we are kind of in the end game if we're not careful. Like we don't have to be. And I think that end game is due to birth rates. And I won't get into much more details here, but I think and they're already talking about a little bit in the news now. It is creeping in as academics start to bring this up. And soon they'll be talking about it more, because let's say I think it'll be apparent by the middle of the century, a little bit past that, and we'll start seeing the decline. Like the population continues to go up for a while more, but it will this century start declining. And once it starts declining, it's not going to necessarily stop naturally. I think there's only a few ways that we could stop it. Some of them positive, some of them less positive. And I think that'd be interesting to discuss.
I don't. Sneaking up another comment. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I just think we need to get past that middle. If before declining it reaches a critically high level, that is a do we get past that stage without bloodshed? And so I don't want to get like the China one-child policy, where actually you introduce something draconian that you suddenly find you can't undo because people have gotten used to it.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm trying to focus on the ones that, well, look, actually, this is if some woman in poverty is having 5 children, that why are we not calling that rape virtually?
Well, it is in some cases, I guess. But so I guess on that kind of strange note for a climate change discussion, I guess we'll end it there. So thank you for listening. And if you've enjoyed, please share, like, and subscribe to Doublethink Dialogues, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.